this video, I'll be exploring and discussing the problems around creating realistic sounding MIDI guitars. I'll also be sharing some of the solutions we have available at the moment so you can approach this problem strategically. For this video, I'll mostly be focusing on working with electric guitar sounds. Perhaps we can explore the challenges of working with acoustic guitar sounds in a future video. Lastly, I should mention that I'll be working with Ableton Live, but most of these concepts will apply to any DAW. Before we begin creating any music, we first need to discuss the instrument itself. The guitar is typically a 6-string instrument, which is played using a pick or using your fingers. It's commonly played in E standard tuning, but there are many other alternative tunings that have become popular as well. To play the guitar, players typically hold a chord shape with one hand and strum with the other. You can also pluck individual strings to create arpeggios, melodic riffs, and more. And you can get a wide range of different tones by simply strumming or plucking the strings at different positions. For this video, I'll be using a software electric guitar instrument that was recorded using a guitar pick at various intensity levels for better expression. I am also running this guitar through a virtual amp and some effects, but I'll discuss how to set that up in more detail later in this video. Now, let's talk about how guitar players create chords. Due to the standard tuning of a guitar, certain chord shapes or voicings are very easy to execute, in turn making them more common. The most common shapes are called open chord voicings. However, because of how unique these chord shapes are, it becomes difficult to recreate them using MIDI. And there are some chords missing from this pool of open chords. So let's talk about another chord voicing. Bar chords are formed by holding down the index finger to shift the lowest and highest notes fretted on a guitar. The other fingers provide the 3rd, 5th, and even the 7th. This shape allows guitar players to create any chord by shifting the chord shape up and down the fretboard. Unlike open chord voicings, these chords are much easier to execute using MIDI due to their transposing nature. You can create most bar chords by using one of two formulas: root, 5th, octave, 3rd, 2nd 5th, and 2nd octave. Or simply leave out that last 2nd octave for higher chords. As an alternative, I created a MIDI effect that triggers bar chords and other voicings by simply setting the key and playing a root note. While we're in the topic of chord voicings, let's take a quick look at power chords, one of the most iconic, if not synonymous, types of sounds for the electric guitar. To create a power chord, you have two options: root, 5th, and octave, or simply leave out the octave. Power chords are typically played with distortion as well, but we'll discuss more about amps and effects later. Now, let's apply these concepts to the simple chord progression. While this is totally possible to play on a real guitar, we could try one of the more classic guitar chord voicings. Here's the same chord progression, now played with bar chord voicings instead. While either version of this could work, the bar chord voicing provides a fuller texture to the chord. Keep in mind, these chords are not being strummed or plucked yet, but I have some solutions for that as well. Now, let's talk a bit about how to strum those chords. You can strum the strings downwards, which is ascending melodically, or you can strum up, which is the opposite. And you can vary the speed as well as the number of strings that you strum. While sequencing MIDI notes in this manner is not difficult, it doesn't feel very musical. As an alternative, I've created a MIDI effect device in Ableton that helps me strum any chord with ease. You can even combine it with the MIDI chord device that I mentioned earlier. Now, let's try strumming the chord progression from earlier. In the MIDI piano roll, we can simply stagger the beginning of the notes using the resize tool. For a quick strumming solution, I could use the chord strummer device. Now here's a tip. Try moving your clip back into your arrangement a bit. This can create a feeling of anticipation if you time the last note that you strum with your other instruments. Now, that's all fine for strumming, but what about plucking strings? You can pluck individual notes one at a time. Or you can let them ring out as you pluck each note. This second example presents another challenge when working with MIDI. Plucking single notes in a discrete fashion is no problem with the MIDI piano roll. But let's take a look at that same arpeggio when you let the notes ring out. In my opinion, that's too much trouble to program like this, so here is a better way. You can enter single discrete notes of your arpeggio and then use the continuous controller number 64, which is the hold or sustain pedal, and then simply draw some automation for the section of the notes you'd like to ring out. If that feels a bit tedious, I've also created a simple macro knob that takes care of this function. Now here's an example of how you can implement this into a song. Just like before, try using discrete notes with automation of the hold pedal to sustain your notes. The key is to reset the pedal automation every time there is a chord change, or to simply add some rhythmic tension. That's a good start, but there are still a couple things we can do to make this even better. Let's add more realism and talk about articulation. Articulation simply refers to the way a note is played, either by utilizing a special technique or a movement. Here are some of the most common, but not all articulations that we can execute with a guitar. Vibrato. You can use the pitch bend MIDI control modulation to add vibrato. Simply pencil in your desired curve, or use the automation curves to get started. Here, it's important to keep in mind the pitch bend range setting of your instrument. Many software guitar instruments and presets are designed with a pitch bend range of 2 semitones, up or down, but your setup and preferences may differ. Bend. For a bend, use the MIDI pitch bend control again, but this time, try bending the pitch up to the desired note and hold it there. You can also add some vibrato in as you reach this note to add more expression. Again, be mindful of the pitch bend range. Slide. For a slide, simply add some grace notes between the notes that you'd like to slide to and from, and experiment with the note length and velocity. This might take extra care and time, but it's worth the effort. Some software instruments may have a slide articulation option, which can come in handy as well. Ghost notes. Imagine for a moment that you are strumming on a guitar with one hand. In order to create a steady rhythm, guitar players tend to keep their strumming hand always moving. When they need a musical rest, it's common for them to mute the strings and play ghost notes. While this might be a necessary move to buy more time to switch into the next note or chord, it also adds an incredibly musical and rhythmic sound. To create ghost notes, first, double check if your guitar instrument includes ghost note samples. Some instruments feature samples of additional articulation sounds that you can trigger. They are typically below the lowest playable note or activated by using a switch. Then, simply fill in any musical rest that you have in your pattern with short ghost notes that follow your rhythm's underlying subdivision. In case you don't have a dedicated ghost note sample trigger, try using a very short low note instead. Palm mute. As another way to add variety, guitar players use the palm of their hand to dampen the strings near the bridge. For a palm mute sound, you'll need a software guitar instrument with the palm mute articulation. This is typically set by a key switch, control, or even a different preset. Then, simply try a repeating rhythmic pattern using root notes from a chord. You can even alternate between open and palm muted sounds to create classic rhythmic patterns. Palm muting can be a lot of fun when paired with power chords, ghost notes, and steady rhythms. For more articulations, consider checking out what your virtual instrument is capable of. Some virtual guitars include extended articulations such as hammer-ons and hammer-offs, using some clever scripting inside their sampler. Now it's time to crank up the gain. Creating convincing electric guitar sounds doesn't end until you have a great amplifier and speaker cabinet at the end of your chain. Much like we have grown accustomed to hearing a certain type of guitar playing style, we've also grown to enjoy the sound of the electric guitar coming out of an amplifier and loudspeaker with incredible mic placement for recording. But before adding virtual amplifiers and effects, it's important to understand how sound is captured from an electric guitar. The sound from the strings is picked up by electromagnetic wound coils called pickups. The position of the pickups themselves drastically affects the output of the guitar, almost like an EQ. You may find different pickup positions on some virtual guitar instruments, but it's not too common. That said, you can use plugins like ReGuitar to artificially change the pickup response of your instrument. Finally, the direct output of an electric guitar is commonly referred to as a DI or direct input signal. It's important to use a DI guitar for your instrument if you plan to add your own virtual amps and effects. To set up your amp, simply place the amplifier and cabinet plugin right after your instrument. Then, try an amp model that suits what you're going for and adjust the gain to taste. I like this one from Neural DSP. They have been creating great virtual amp plugins in recent years with high quality amp emulation and impulse responses for various cabinets with the ability to reposition and even change out microphones. If you're looking for a great freebie, IK Multimedia's Tone X platform has a free tier that includes a variety of amps that sound fantastic. Virtual amplifiers like this are nonlinear, which simply means you can get a wild variation of tones just by adjusting the input gain and even the volume of the instrument itself. As you adjust the input gain, try adjusting the output level to compensate for any change in loudness. Then, try adding some effects before or after your amp. There is no right or wrong answer here. Each effect will simply sound a little different depending on where it's placed in the chain. For a clean electric guitar sound, I like to play with compression before and sometimes after the amp, depending on what I'm going for. Sometimes I like to add a chorus effect for a little bit more vibe. And finally, a nice wide stereo reverb to give it a sense of space. For a heavier guitar sound, I'll simply use some distortion before the amp and really work with the amp itself to find the tone that I'm looking for. No need for compression, but a very light touch of reverb can work well. In this final section, I just wanted to take a quick moment to discuss the importance of working with idiosyncratic guitar sounds if what you aim for is familiarity and/or realism. There are a variety of guitar-centric scales you can use as a starting point so that you can create more convincing riffs and melodies like the major and minor pentatonic scale. In addition, you can find many great examples online for popular chord progressions that really shine on guitar thanks to their unique chord voicings as well as their strumming patterns and arpeggios. And finally, there is an entire world out there to explore when it comes to working with both real and virtual amplifiers, as well as guitar pedals and mixing techniques when it comes to the sound of the guitar itself. These are all things that will take some time to learn and explore, but can be extremely rewarding once you find your sound. I hope that by now you have learned a lot and can truly appreciate how deep the rabbit hole goes when it comes to creating amazing guitar sounds. It's a lot of work, but it begins by understanding the fundamental underlying challenges. As a guitarist myself, I will continue to play and record my guitars when I can, but whenever I am without my guitar, I can always turn to these strategies and devices to help me close the gap. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and consider supporting me using one of the links below. There are some freebies and other goodies that I've created, and I would love for you to check them out. Until next time, see you in the loop.